friends, countrymen, Romans, not you. Get out. Welcome to Heavy Hands. Do you like that bit, Phil? I heard you almost snicker apologetically. Hmm?
Yeah, let's pretend I didn't.
Welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And we're talking about fights, which I'm sure is a shocking revelation to everyone who's just tuned in. What? Huh? UFC 260-something? What is this, 262?
261, I think.
261, that's what I said. Thank you, Phil. Is coming up around the corner. 3 title fights booked for that card. And as has increasingly become the case when the UFC loads a card with title fights, they know they can get away with doing other stuff on the undercard. So this time, it appears that instead of trying to put together like a really satisfying, meaningful undercard, they are trying to, as far as I can tell, market some Chinese fighters. Is that sort of... I mean, I'm just guessing. Yeah, there's some newcomers I've certainly never heard of. Phil, you can make that comment about me having fun doing the vivisection now if you want.
I certainly expect you to.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, other than that, like even the early prelims are very nondescript, but even the sort of the quote unquote main preliminary card ain't great.
It's not great, but they know, but why is that? Because who cares? 3 title fights, 2 of which are really, really interesting. One of which is, I don't know, maybe more interesting than I initially gave it credit for. Why don't I stop alluding and tell you what they are? Jorge Masvidal is rematching with Kamaru Usman, despite having lost 49-46 at best. In the first meeting between the two men, he's one of the biggest stars in the sport right now, so he's talked himself right back into a rematch. And I think there are some X factors there that may change the dynamic. We'll talk about that in a moment. In the co-main event, actually, I'm not looking at the card and I haven't memorized the order, but I think it is Rose Namajunas versus Weili Zhang. Nothing politically loaded about that fight. The two fighters have been completely respectful and indeed have viewed one another as human beings, merely fellow travelers on the same journey. And, Valentina Shevchenko is fighting Jessica Andrade. And God damn it, Phil, I'm kind of excited for a Valentina Shevchenko fight. And I think you know why that is.
It's the best fight you can make for her, I think.
Yes. There's only one reason I would ever get excited for a Valentina Shevchenko fight. She might lose. So we will be talking about all of those. I don't think we're going to have any time to discuss Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. If we do end up talking about it, that will be a little off-cut bonus episode for the Patreon, because God knows I loved the hell out of that performance from Robert Whittaker. Incredibly, just a beautiful, artistic, satisfying exhibition of skill. Really a masterclass. So maybe we'll talk about that later. Anyway, Masvidal, Usman 2. But first, Phil, before we get into that, let's talk about the fight people really want to hear about. We barely mentioned it last week. Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Freddie Roach's protege, Ben Askren, took on who was that weird lawyer who told Jake Paul not to talk about the sexual assault allegations? I'm assuming Jake Paul is his protege. I don't know the guy's name, but he had a nice suit. It was a real fantastic showdown. What did you make of it?
I think it was another high watermark for like cross sports bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the best thing about MMA and boxing crossovers is that we get some real quality trash and just good, excellent lies out of it. Because I remembered seeing from Ben Folks, he was reporting on something which Freddie Roach had been saying, and Freddie Roach was talking about how much Ben Askren had been improving, which I respect because, like, when you're lying, it's best to ease people in. Don't come out with something totally insane.
Start from the beginning. The common ground we can all agree on. He needs improvement.
Yeah, don't come in there and be like, oh yeah, Ben Askren's hands are actually really good. When I got in there, I was like, there's barely anything I can teach this guy. No. He did not do that. He said, he was improving every day, even though like he spent a week there, and it is someone spending a week from the base of Ben Askren. But then he said he has impressive power in his punches, and his conditioning is off the charts. I don't think Jake will be able to keep up with Ben, much less keep Ben off of him.
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord. Like,
now that you mention it, though, a pretty credible series. Like, he really did angle it all just perfectly, right? Impressive power, that sort of tells you he hits harder than you think. Once again, starting from the baseline assumption that we all know Ben Askren does not hit hard. All right? And then the stamina, that's just straight up true. Ben Askren just...
I mean, it was true. Who knows?
Well, it's usually true, at least in a wrestling fight. Probably, actually, it wouldn't have been true in boxing anyway. But
especially now that he was looking quite fat.
He really was tremendously fat. Yeah, so we've put it together that Freddie Roach is just conning either us or the MMA fighters who are working with him. I think we've decided that it is in fact the fans who are getting conned by Freddie Roach. Because
yeah, I mean, because this is going back to when Freddie Roach has been running the long con on well, not really running the long con on MMA, because he's been running the short con, but he's just been running it many times for a really long time. Like, back when he was training Arlovsky and he was like, he's really good. He's a really good boxer. We're thinking we're going to be putting him up against Valuev, and then we'll be probably aiming for the Klitschko's later. And he's just, what are you talking about?
And Arlovsky,
he only learned to throw his left hand years after leaving your tutelage, and went to train with the luminaries at Jackson Wink because he said that Freddie Roach wasn't actually helping his striking that much.
Brandon Gibson did much, much more good for Andrei Arlovsky's striking.
Brandon Gibson wasn't even there.
Was he not?
When Arlovsky left. He went to train under Mike Winklejohn instead of Freddie Roach. That is one of the most damning things I could think of. But yeah, one of the things this reminded me of was obviously like the classic torrent of garbage that came out when like James Toney was going to fight Randy Couture.
Yeah.
You remember that they said that he was like giving real problems to purple belts, was it? And that there was this persistent rumor and no one knew how it started, that he had submitted King Mo with a guillotine.
I don't remember that. All I remember was the side check kick. Was James
Oh,
Toney
the side check kick, obviously.
Newfound kicking expertise.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep.
I mean, very good. I respect in a thing like this. I always respect when people can just talk,
just lie,
complete bollocks with a straight face.
Yeah. Freddie Roach is good at it too. He's already a very like sarcastic, dry sort of person, so he really sells it. Yeah, just beautiful. I love that he's just getting free marketing off of looking at his phone while these MMA fighters like, I don't know, do their taxes or something. They just come to his place to get some business done. Don't do any work on the pads or anything, and then he gets to talk up their boxing. The other thing, last thing I'll mention before we move on to the actual fights, this really, really struck me as funny. Well, first of all, I'll say Jake Paul clearly, he's an incredibly tiresome person and probably a very bad person, but clearly takes boxing fairly seriously and is kind of good at it. Like you would see people of Jake Paul's level. I think Mookie Alexander first said this, but you would see people of Jake Paul's level on any number of boxing undercards. That's like a boxing prospect right there. So he doesn't look bad. The other thing I thought was really funny is that you know how Ben Askren moves in the most unathletic way possible?
Yes.
So I think he definitely got dropped hard. He face planted when Paul hit him, but then the referee wanted him to like walk towards him to show that he had recovered, and he did seem to recover pretty well, as we know Askren can. And I don't even think Askren was stumbling. I think it was just the naturally ungainly way that he moves. And the referee was like, no.
I respect it.
This can't continue. Something about the fact that Ben Askren's natural awkward movement is enough to convince a referee that he's completely punch drunk. Really tickled me. Sensational fight. Our prayers go out to Oscar de la Hoya, and I'm only half kidding about that. The man was having a terrible night. Usman, Masvidal. The first fight. Not competitive. Or was it? This is my question to you, Phil. 4 rounds in the bank, for sure. Even the striking portions, maybe not entirely won by Masvidal, but for a guy who came in on whatever it was, a couple days notice, a couple weeks, something like that, clearly out of shape, in my opinion, looked like someone who had already accepted that he was not going to win the decision and had to knock his opponent out. He landed an awful lot on what seemed to be an uncharacteristically, even for Usman, an uncharacteristically stiff and uncomfortable Kamaru Usman. So my question to you is, to what do you attribute, first of all, do you agree that you saw that? Second, to what do you attribute that dynamic? Was it Usman not being ready because of the layoff? Was it Usman just having shifted trainers? Or is it just something fundamental to Kamaru Usman's striking that he's going to get teed up again by Masvidal, at least in the beginning?
I don't know. I mean, I tend to think that Usman, you can tell after the fight he had just felt like he had tons of pressure on him.
Yeah.
And I think it was especially one of those ones where like Masvidal had been hitting people with like the meme knockouts.
Yeah.
It was a gym rivalry fight. It was, an ATT versus Blackzilians, or at least, Usman had just left Blackzilians. A Florida camp showdown. Mm-hmm. I think he really didn't want to look bad, and I think he was very, very tense for that reason. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. I think both of them did not look great. And I think the question really is which one of them looked worse and why? Because the other thing is, so one of the things we were talking about before we started recording is where was Masvidal's jab in this fight? Because he really did look like he was selling out for the knockout. That he was just, because much as he's one of the most credible improvements in Masvidal's game is that he's adjusted to being in a division where everyone is as tall as him. He used to be a hugely upright guy, knees up the middle, fighting behind the long jab, and has become a really credible level changer, someone who rolls under punches more. I mean, again, Masvidal himself, I've said before, is not like the world's greatest defensive fighter, but is very he's accurate and very, very tough, and will move his head enough.
He's very adaptable. He'll get touched up, but he will find ways to prevent the same thing working again and again.
But he'd really seemed to decide in the Usman fight that the level changes and the shifts were the way to get to Usman.
Yeah,
he was not going to try and jab with him at all. I think that is that's got to be the major thing that he can change coming into this fight.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. There are a couple jabs, but even the ones that are thrown are kind of like lancing power jabs. They are not the classic Masvidal, just completely effortless, casually thrown, quick, accurate jabs. A lot of that certainly has to do with the fact that he came in and fought a hell of a lot of the fight in southpaw. And I think I just want to add my 2 cents to what you already said, that he wanted the 3 or 4 left hand tricks that he has developed as he has, because the adaptation you mentioned to fighting the bigger opponents has largely been embracing his athleticism. I think Masvidal also, for the first time in his career, probably feels faster than a lot of the people he's fighting. And so yeah, he did a lot of like, trying to set up that big stutter step, trying to, as you said, level change into the left hand, all these different moves. But they were kind of one layer and then it was done. And I don't think that was just Usman's pressure with the wrestling. I do suspect there's an opportunity here for Masvidal to get more work done with his jab and his footwork, to do more feinting, and to fight more in open space. I think those, in fact, will be the tactics that could allow him to fight in open space. If he doesn't, or even if he does, and the fight just continues on, then the big picture is still the same to me. It's the same reason I picked Usman so confidently the first time. Masvidal's going to back himself to the fence, and he's going to get out-wrestled. It's just a thing that happens in so many of his fights. He always backs into the fence. I mentioned his defensive adaptability. I think we long ago identified that that is tied to Masvidal's tendency to let fights just get drawn away from him. That, for example, he didn't get out-wrestled by Usman the way many people do. He didn't get taken down very often. A lot of the positions he got stuck in were neutral positions, but that is the thing with Masvidal. He will get stuck in neutral positions, trying not to give anything away without necessarily creating opportunities for himself. He just sort of becomes less and less proactive as the fight against an aggressive fighter goes on. And as he has to respond to more and more layers of their offense and their initiative. So it's hard to imagine that not happening again. And that basically means that, right, even if Masvidal comes in with the changes, we're kind of still putting him in the same position where he does have to knock Usman out or finish him.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think all of that is pretty much true. This is the problem, is that there's no reason to assume that Usman can't just burn long stretches of the fight on the fence.
Yeah, he's happy to.
Racking up damage. I mean, as much as people complained that it was just foot stomps and so on, he still landed a lot of body punches. There was still absolutely no doubt who won any of the rounds where Usman had significant clinch control.
None.
He didn't get split up. And yeah, it's just the fact that I think Usman gets more comfortable when the opponent is backed into the cage. One thing I am interested a bit in this fight, sort of based on what you were talking about, is do you see Usman's stance changing stance more?
Yes.
Because I think that Masvidal was kind of waiting for the step in to try and counter a lot when he was, he became in many ways an ersatz Tyron Woodley in this fight, just one with like a left hand instead of a right one, and much more craft. But it wasn't that dissimilar in terms of like the cage control.
Yeah.
The thing is, Usman, I think, did shift to southpaw at some point, and suddenly Masvidal found his left hand totally smothered and just it looked very, very uncomfortable. Usman didn't do it much. He fought almost the entirety of the fight in orthodox. But I do find myself thinking, Usman has shown that he's, I think, for reasons we mentioned, I think, in general, the general pressure of it all. I think this was also, no, it wasn't his first title defense. It was the first one was against Covington, of course.
Right.
But he is someone who adapts, and I think he is someone who builds on success. And I think that if he can find more ways to deliver clean offense by the cage, rather than getting stuck in the clinch, that probably helps as well. Like I said, I don't think Masvidal is the world's, he's not a great defensive technician anywhere apart from in the grappling.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous is when he is trading shots. But I think if Usman can throw him off with his own shifts, I think that probably works for him about as well as it did for Masvidal, and probably can erase any advantages that Masvidal would have from fighting more of his normal fight, which I think he should. But something which I think you alluded to before we talked, does Masvidal want to fight that fight anymore? Is the blitz kind of Masvidal? Is that just kind of who he is now? Does he still have the can he still be the jabbing guy? Because the last time he really was
Darren Till.
Is it Cerrone?
I would say Darren Till.
Okay, fair enough.
There was a good bit of him jabbing and working off the back foot and counter-punching in that fight. In fact, before he found the big shifty left hand, it was all pretty standard left hooks in the pocket that were landing clean. So he can blend it. We've seen relatively recently that he can blend it. So I don't know. It's something to consider. Along the same lines is the idea that we raised when Usman fought Burns is his approach to pressure, which once again we consider to be like the linchpin to him easily winning this fight, or at least convincingly winning it. Is that changing under Trevor Whitman's tutelage? That will be interesting as well. If Usman decides to quote unquote be patient. Like, I think being patient, don't do it this time. Just get in there. Fuck being patient. You're at range with Jorge Masvidal, and he is historically very clever offensively, and dangerous more so than ever in these last few years. So I'll be looking out for that as well, but I can't say yet with any confidence. I just think it's a distinct possibility that Usman maybe pressures less, and we get a somewhat different type of fight. It's hard to imagine, though, because the first fight was just so... He just won it so consummately, doing such classic Usman stuff. You'd have to think Whitman would be nuts to think, hey, let's not do any of that anymore. Instead, let's fight off the back foot.
Yeah, I mean, he was very encouraging to Usman after that fight. He was just like, look, we won. That's all that matters. And Usman was like, no, I wasn't comfortable in the striking exchanges, and I didn't feel like I really... It's like, no, we won.
Yep.
You're also, a champion. We keep going.
If I'm Usman, I have every incentive to do 3 times as much clinch foot stomping as I did last time, just to piss.
We know he's training them.
Yeah. Just to piss Masvidal off. So I really hope, honestly, I'm hoping for an even more boring fight than the last one.
Yeah, that was the thing I was thinking, because I think there's a genuinely good chance this is a much more interesting fight than the last one. I think even though the whole thing of Masvidal being on a full camp is a bit of a meme, I still don't expect him to win. But I think, there are definitely elements in there which say this could still be pretty tough. Or this could be much more competitive, much more entertaining than the last one was. I don't want it to be.
No.
Because I don't like it when the UFC gets rewarded for their bullshit.
And this is the wrong fight to make.
Yeah. One of Masvidal's signature wins that got him the first title shot, which again, Kamaru Usman has fought people in the interim.
Yeah.
And Masvidal has not.
Yeah.
That's not how titles work.
And the guy, and I believe you were just going to say, the guy Masvidal beat just got knocked out by a YouTuber.
Right. So yeah, that win hasn't aged that well. Let's be honest. That Askren KO.
Yeah. I mean, he did it a little quicker, but come on. All right, let's take a break then. Both of us picking Usman again. I think there's just no other logical pick to make. We saw the first fight. It was very definitive. Yep, Kamaru Usman. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Namajunas versus Weili Zhang and Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade coming up.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about UFC 261's co-main event, Namajunas, Jessica Andrade. Really, really tricky fight to wrap one's head around. And I think that's because, Phil, how can we really know that either of these fighters really mean what they do in the cage? Can we trust them? Or are they merely...
Maybe someone's just telling them to do things.
That's right. Is Rose Namajunas merely a puppet of Trevor Whitman? That's the question we have to ask. But whether or not she is, it's a very tantalizing fight. Really, really exciting, in fact. Namajunas seems to bring to the table some of the things that Joanna Jędrzejczyk troubled Zhang with. She's certainly got the reach. She's got more power. And she can pressure. But we have to ask, as always, is Rose Namajunas physical enough? Can Weili Zhang... I mean, we know Weili Zhang can endure a truly hellish war of a fight. Can she create that kind of chaos, and can Rose survive it if she does? Very, very interesting. In a lot of ways, in fact, there are some similarities between these two women. For example, Zhang against Jędrzejczyk kind of fit the same sort of pattern that Namajunas seems to fall into in longer fights, where she kept seeming to gas and then just didn't. She would have a couple minutes at least per round after the point where she started to gas, where she would have a second wind. And then maybe she'd get tired again. But honestly, I want to give her some credit for that too. I don't think it was just sort of accidental. I think she actually took time off in the rounds. She seems to actually sort of navigate that counter-punching bent of hers to control her pacing in the fight. She knows she can use distance as a trigger, and so when she needs a little break, she can create a little distance and sort of just stick there and let the opponent be the one to close the gap and start another exchange. Rose, very similar in that respect, so we're probably looking at a sort of, I don't know, a very competitive war, but then the question is always, is Rose Namajunas tough enough for that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting questions to be asked in this one, because I think, did we pick Joanna reasonably confidently over Weili? I think we both did, right?
I honestly do not remember. I'll take your word for it.
So I think our basic read was that Weili is largely a counterpuncher.
I do remember us saying she didn't have a good left hook, and then she really, really improved it for that fight.
But that, she didn't really have much in the way of range weapons.
Yeah.
Apart from, she's mostly a kind. I compared her to Lando Venata, in that she tends to start her entries with a stepping low kick.
Yeah.
And then sort of everything comes from that first step in. But she's not a big range closing person.
Yeah.
So, and without sort of elite pressuring footwork, she was going to be stuck against someone with kind of better range tools, someone who it's been dangerous to be stuck on the outside against historically. And I don't think most of that read was necessarily wrong. I think the things which really made that fight competitive were Joanna Jędrzejczyk still on offense does really fall into her strikes when she's trying to especially when she's trying to pressure.
Yes.
And two, Weili Zhang is a really good kick counterer.
Yes.
And I think Joanna is someone who just psychologically needs safe long range strikes in order to fight her best fight.
Yeah.
This is no discredit to her. I think there's a lot of fighters who just really, really... I think this is one of the things I've come to realize about MMA more as time goes on, is that there are some fighters who just do not perform well when they are not... they are not just the taller person in there.
They need to be able to steal something from their opponent, They don't want to have an exchange.
Yeah.
They don't want to trade. They want to be able to steal points.
So Rose is a interesting proposition here because, again, like, I don't expect Zhang's footwork unless it's improved greatly, and this is, certainly something we can ask. They're about the same age in terms of their MMA careers. I think Rose is actually a few years younger than Zhang.
Mm-hmm.
But she hasn't shown fantastic pressuring footwork. And if we're talking like hanging out at range, Rose is obviously far less consistent than Joanna in terms of her output, and but she's also someone who is, as Joanna found out herself, like really dangerous to hang out against.
Yes.
Because not only is she tall and rangy, but she is very, very fast.
Yes.
And she closes distance very quickly. So
especially early.
There seems to be like very probable we're going to get like an early going at the very least, where Rose is just kind of picking Zhang off.
Yeah, I kind of expect the same thing. Yeah, I think what you're saying, right? Like the tendency of Zhang's, I don't know. I'm becoming more and more convinced the more I watch her of her tendency towards counterpunching. That is just the way she likes to initiate exchanges, and she's really up for it. I mean, like, you bring a pace to her, as Joanna did, she's going to up her pace of counters. But that is sort of her method of controlling the fight. She's like Valentina Shevchenko, but 10,000 times more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense at all. So what you're saying, that she's going to be waiting on the end of an increasingly tricky and quick and powerful Rose Namajunas. She's absolutely going to eat some jabs and some lead right hands. She's going to end up getting stung and then having to turn after Rose. The thing that was most impressive in Rose's last fight with Jessica Andrade, I think, was an improvement in defensive layers after initiating an attack. There were several instances where she would strike and then pivot off. There were times when she would get in a strike and then roll under the return shot. I absolutely think she's going to have success with that and is going to confound some of Zhang's early counterpunching. But what happens...
And you had this read as well, which I thought was very good. Rose is very... she's very tricky to defend against, but she is not impossible to counterpunch. No. And you called out like her rematch against Andrade.
Yes.
But Jessica does start to find the counters.
Was she? Phil, I need you to say that again. We're revisiting one of your most famous delusions, that Jessica Andrade was not taking over that fight in round 3.
It doesn't matter. She lost. Jessica Andrade is taking over every fight.
Mm-hmm.
We've explained this before.
She absolutely was finding success, and the counters were the way in. Especially with like all that head movement. I do wonder about that. Although I don't know. Like it's not like it wasn't super functional, most of that head movement. Certainly if you give Jessica Andrade a tool, she can use it nonstop for every single minute of the fight. And I think that did force Rose to work a little harder to get at her with the jabs. Yeah,
I think it stopped. It slowed the pace at which she was sucking up damage for the first. But it was. I think the main thing for Rose is not necessarily. I think the main thing for Rose is simply like mental fatigue.
You're right about. You are absolutely.
That's the thing that really hurts her, and it just drained her a bit. It wasn't like it was the most effective head movement in the world, but she was just.
You're right.
Like. And it stopped her from just like racking up big punches, even though she still did quite a lot of that.
Yeah, but she didn't get hit nearly as cleanly, like right on the point of the chin as she did the first time. And that was really all.
Yeah, she was getting.
It was on the side of the head. But I think it did sort of force Rose to sit down and create a few more exchanges than she probably would have wanted to ideally, because she had to time Andrade coming in. and plant her feet a little longer to catch her in that right moment of head movement. But anyway, the point is that
as she was coming in, it gave, so Andrade was not just like, I need to stand here and then die. It gave her more confidence that she could low kick Namajunas as she was coming in.
Yeah, and the point of all this is that Andrade worked her way into that fight finally when she did with the counterpunching. They were same time counters largely. She would, because Rose, as quick as she is, she does tend to step in really hard, especially for a Trevor Whitman fighter, to be honest. It's just one of her things. She comes in this long, deep stance and plants real hard on that front foot, which is, I think, why the layered defense was so useful and such a nice addition in that Andrade rematch. But she was there. Her head is coming forward. She's ducking. It was cross counters. It was wide rights to the body. Andrade would slip inside the jab and throw that right hook to the body. And it was the right uppercut as well. Again, because Namajunas comes in sort of hunched forward, leaning forward. She was there for that right uppercut several times. And
I think Namajunas does. I think Namajunas also does have a tell when she's tired. It's actually the same one that, or at least when she's sort of mentally feeling it. Probably, it's a combination of the two. It's like Amanda Nunes, although no one's really been able to push Nunes to that point anymore. And that's sort of where it is. When Rose starts to push people, and she starts to just kind of shove them away from her.
Yes.
Is, I think, when she's no longer sort of confident in her escapes.
Yeah, I would agree. So, she started to get busted up really badly in the third round of that fight and was getting hurt worse and worse with each clean counter that landed. And it is kind of hard for me to imagine Zhang not finding those. Zhang appears to be insanely tough. She appears to be insanely mentally durable. I know that both she and Rose have now gone 5 rounds with Joanna, and they were fantastic performances from both of them. I don't know, though. There was a feeling of, I think Joanna brought it way more against Zhang. Far more aggressive, far more insistent on trying to take over the fight, where we can recall remarking in her Namajunas rematch that's what she really needed and didn't have, was just to push forward and force the fight on Rose to try to tip her over the edge. She brought that kind of pressure and pace against Zhang, and Zhang was never even close to tipping over the edge. She may have had Rose's same pattern of seeming to tire and then just jumping back out with some refreshed stamina, but she seemed very controlled and calm, despite how insane that fight was.
That's one of the super interesting things about this fight, I think. Because I think, the main things I think that turn it are can Zhang get to the clinch consistently or particularly get takedowns? Because I think against Jędrzejczyk, she did actually show some good entries. I mean, they didn't really work, and they mostly got her beaten up in the clinch, but that's because it's Joanna Jędrzejczyk. That is an area which Rose, whilst, again, individually very dangerous in the clinch, the first couple of times you get her there, you might be in bad trouble because she'll hit you with a knee. She's not dangerous there for a long period of time. Because it saps her. Right.
I think she's actually dangerous in that first layer, increasingly dangerous over the years, because she knows she can't hang out there for long. Against Andrade, she certainly took a cue from some past opponents, again, in the rematch, and landed hard, instantaneous knees and then forced a break.
But the other really interesting thing is that I think they have the opposite trend when it comes to how tired they get. Meaning that in the Rose's dynamic against Joanna is that she would win the early going of the round and then fade out of it.
Right.
but generally have built up enough lead that she had won the round anyway. And Zhang, as you mentioned, she would sort of look pretty. She would look kind of worn out at the beginning of rounds.
Yep.
And then just force herself back into it.
She would
by
rest
the end of
in the round, and then
get
triggered back into going nuts with their counterpunching.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. Like, I don't know how that dynamic lends itself, who that dynamic lends to winning, but it probably does lend to making incredibly back and forth competitive rounds.
Oh yeah.
This is like, I think I've probably said this a couple of times. But one of the things that made Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks so competitive is that they both like taking breaks, and they took breaks at different times, and sometimes they didn't take breaks at the same time.
Yeah.
So you would have big long stretches of just Johnny Hendricks tooling Robbie Lawler, and then vice versa. Mm-hmm. Because Robbie Lawler wanted to recharge his brain, and Johnny Hendricks wanted to. Robbie Lawler wanted to get his reads, and Johnny Hendricks wanted to run through his his offense again. So I think we can get some really, not just a story of the fight, but really back and forth rounds where Rose, if she survives to an end of a round, she might come out and just torch Weili again at the start of the next one.
I can see it.
It's a really interesting fight.
I can see it, and then in everything, there's a counter to everything you can possibly consider. I'm always trying to think of these things in comparisons to what I've seen, and is Rose better, for example, at getting off on angles after initiating and therefore evading counters than Joanna was? Yes. Does it take as many counters to shake her? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just I think you're right. I think we're very likely looking at a fight where I see Zhang sort of just naturally getting into it more over the course of the fight. So I think we're looking at first couple rounds weighted towards Rose, last couple rounds weighted towards Weili, but each round I suspect will be Rose cracking Zhang early, and then Zhang finding the counter that helps her turn things around.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to go with Weili Zhang in this fight, I think, Phil.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. I think the lightning speed of the counter punches. I think this is another thing with Rose. She likes to have her reach advantage. She likes to have her speed advantage. She's in there against somebody who is incredibly quick, especially quick-handed. And somebody who will use passivity, which Rose loves to bully people, will use the appearance of passivity to draw an opponent in. Very confidently retreating, not getting overwhelmed, but taking half steps back, waiting for Rose to take that one committed step. And when she gets the timing on that, I think you're right. With Rose, with the mental fatigue, I think she does tend to find it a little harder as the fight goes on to come up with novel ways, or to just repeatedly cycle through the different little moves she has to enter unpredictably. So I see Zhang taking over, but I see it being, I think it's going to be a fucking war, man. I think it's going to be insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Rose is just a very tough person to trust.
Yeah,
it's one of those things. If I had never seen her beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk over 5 rounds, I would have thought it was impossible.
Right.
If you took that singular fight out of her record, I would pick Weili effortlessly. Mm-hmm. But it's the fact that I know she can go 5 rounds with an incredibly mentally durable fighter. Yep. And frankly, and she won it more clearly than Zhang did.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a flyer pick, but I'm gonna take Rose, just because I think there's a lot of the dynamic flying around that she's just gonna get she just can't fight a physical fight for 5 rounds. And I think that might be true, but I'm not sure if like being a counterpuncher who needs to spin up every round is quite the same thing as being as relentless as Jessica Andrade or even Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yeah, it definitely is not. It's a whole different. I mean, can you think of another counterpuncher that Rose has even fought?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
not at all.
There aren't many who are, even if you can think of some, there aren't many who are on a par with Weili Zhang. But all you can look at is fighters who aren't particularly comfortable countering, finding success there.
Mm. So yeah, I think I'll take Rose. I mean, I wouldn't. It's not one I would necessarily advise people to follow me on.
Can I say the last harebrained thing? Something I mentioned before we began.
Mm-hmm.
This is my little armchair psychology read on the fight. So Rose's dumbass comments. You described them as quaint, which, as we all know, is a very polite way of saying dumb. Doubling down. The thing that she said was that well, listen, everyone says this Zhang is really nice and sweet, and she is. That's the thing. She's incredibly genial and polite and respectful and positive. And Rose is like, well, how do we even know that's who she really is? We can't trust that. She might be being told to say whatever she says. And to me, that it smacks just a little too much of Ronda Rousey having to invent reasons why she could be justifiably mad at Holly Holm.
Yep.
Because Holly Holm was so nice and respectful. We know that Ronda, like Rose, bit of a head case. And I think in that fight, it bespoke a certain anxiety. And I don't know that necessarily is even meaningful, because we already know that Rose Namajunas is just an incredibly anxious person. She probably feels some measure of that in every fight lead up, and is a brilliant fighter regardless. So maybe it means nothing. But I'm just saying, Rose has somehow let Zhang in her head without Zhang having to do anything. That's my take. That she has allowed Zhang's just indefatigable niceness to rub her the wrong way. So we'll see. I don't know if that has any bearing, but that's my read.
Yep, fair enough. I mean, Rose is she's an incredibly strange person who, like, after she lost to Andrade, she basically said she wasn't going to, there was a significant period where she said she wasn't going to fight MMA anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And
a little high strung.
Yeah, everything since then does not exactly fill you with, like, oh wow, her head's totally screwed on now.
Yeah.
This is someone who's on their way back to the title. So yeah, again, wouldn't necessarily advise people to follow me in this particular pick. I just think there's a bit of...
Oh, I don't think you're crazy. I think she's going to crack Weili Zhang with huge shots. Absolutely. Especially early, but I think in every round. Weili Zhang is not that great defensively. It's all footwork. And that's basically it. She's going to get hit and lit up in portions of this fight. I truly don't know. I mean, I'm not confident in my Weili Zhang pick at all. All right. Well, that is one that I cannot wait to talk about after the fact. I really want to know what happens so I can try my best to understand something tangible. Speaking of intangibles, Valentina Shevchenko is fighting Jessica Andrade. Many things about Valentina Shevchenko are intangible. Her personality, for example, her sense of humor, her empathy. These are all things that you really just can't find if you look for them. We assume they're there. They're human traits, but who knows? Who knows? We're going to talk about that and Jessica Andrade's just completely foregone victory after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are wrapping our heads around Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade. Those of us who are sensible people know that, of course, Jessica Andrade is the nightmare matchup for Valentina Shevchenko. If Jessica Andrade can't beat Valentina Shevchenko, then no one can, and I'm going to kill myself. That's what I want to say to start off this segment. So now, Phil, tell me why Valentina Shevchenko is going to win. You son of a bitch. Is it you want to do this to me? I'm your friend.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have no hope left if you're right.
But you've got to remember that your pain is pretty funny to watch. I remember when Zane was getting bullied. Remember how fun that was?
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah.
Well, I'll film my self-execution for your viewing pleasure then. We were just having, I think, a very interesting discussion about this fight. Simply the discussion we were having is enough to tell you, Phil, this is one of the most interesting fights that's ever been booked for Valentina Shevchenko.
Oh, yes.
God, I wish I knew how we started that last discussion. Here's the thing. Yes, do you have something?
You go.
Jessica Andrade is very physical. She is very capable of lengthening exchanges. This is something I'm convinced Valentina Shevchenko does not want to happen. She is relentless in a particular way I suspect will be effective against Shevchenko, which is to say that she doesn't care enough about getting hit for it to change her style, right? This was a bit of a problem for Shevchenko against Jennifer Maia, who seemed really credibly to have accepted that she was going to get stung and that what she needed to do was fire back when that happened. It did absolutely give her some success pressuring. It allowed her to clinch up with Shevchenko and throw her against the fence. It allowed her to land on the ends of some exchanges. Andrade is uniquely capable of that kind of thing, as Rose Namajunas has now learned twice. You may be able to hit her with the best shots you've ever landed on anyone, but she's going to find a way to hit you at the same time or to hit you afterwards. And Valentina Shevchenko is really used to inspiring a kind of fear in her opponents. Her extremely quick triggers, her explosive movement, the power she strikes with, even the loud key eyes. All of this, I think, contributes to opponents just becoming very, very twitchy and jumpy.
And she's just very good at controlling range.
She's phenomenal at controlling range. She probably has the most consistent distance management of anyone. It is like the bedrock of her style. Cross this line, and I will hit you with one very hard, quick shot, and then reset to my distance. And she's used to people respecting that distance because of that. What happens if she fights somebody who knows they're going to get hit, or at least that their opponent is going to attempt to hit them when they cross that line, and will continue to cross the line anyway? My question is, yes, Shevchenko can land on Andrade 100%. Can she dissuade her? And if she can't, does she have to knock her out? Does it have to be a Shevchenko head kick, which very likely might happen? That left high kick.
Well, I mean, so
yes.
As I was saying before we started recording this segment, I feel unfortunately that we're looking at a bit of an Usman Masvidal dynamic here, where Andrade can do better than Jennifer Maia did. But Jennifer Maia, as you mentioned, poses a lot of those problems of sort of relentlessness and physicality. But I think the general problem might be the same one, which is that Shevchenko's second safety zone, clinch takedowns. Jessica Andrade has genuinely, I think, I thought she had in the second Rose fight, but she has genuinely improved. That head movement that was just sort of distracting Rose and wearing her down a bit until did actually start to pay dividends in the third round of that fight, but also was working much better and right from the beginning against Caitlin Chukagian.
Mm-hmm.
She is like I think she does benefit from the fact that she's now fighting people who are slightly less slow and she's still very physically powerful. I think she's genuinely improved her striking quite a bit. Probably, I think the issue is that, like, in many ways, Andrade's clinch might be the worst part of her game now.
It kind of has been, right? She got out clinch fought by Angela Hill in the very beginning of her strawweight career.
Yeah, I think the gap might have widened because she's so confident that she's just, going to be able to out horsepower people in the clinch.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure that she's going to be ready for the fact that Shevchenko is just going to throw her down and work a very controlling top game. And again, once she's down there, she's relied on the fact that she's a tireless physical monster to, just throw off fighters like Claudia Gadelha and so on. But Shevchenko is an extremely physically powerful and highly conservative top game player. So I'm genuinely, there are many things I would really like to see from Andrade. I think, we called this out beforehand. If she can body punch Shevchenko.
Oh yeah. Shevchenko
is very hard to hit to the, head. But, some of the more consistent success people have had has been just snap kicks to the body, whether that's Jędrzejczyk or Nunes.
Yeah.
I would be very surprised if Andrade couldn't clip her to the body in exchanges. She's really started working that into her game. She started working that back into her game more, I think.
Yeah, and that is salient to the Shevchenko clinch takedown situation, because by far Shevchenko's most consistent takedowns are off of caught kicks. And while Joanna Jędrzejczyk did have lots of success kicking Shevchenko to the body, that was also how Shevchenko kept getting her down and just stealing minutes at a time off the clock. Andrade, as you said, body puncher, not presenting the same opportunities. So yeah, that's the thing. Here's the other thing. I think the clinch is, yes, it's not a great area for Andrade technically. It's undeniably technically her worst area. But, and I think that also is just a sort of a factor of physicality as well. Like, she's squat, so taller people can just grab her head and yank her into knees. That's probably also the most profound representation of Andrade's who care approach to striking defense, where, yes, it has improved, but she still uses her chin as a trigger. And yes, like Rose Namajunas, we mentioned in the last segment, in her rematch with Andrade, she got Andrade in those clinches and she did these quick hits and then broke away. But increasingly, as the fight went on, Andrade just accepted that she was going to get kneed in the face and bombed Rose with right hooks over the top of the caulifly. Just blind right hooks. Does Shevchenko like when stuff like that happens? I don't think she's comfortable with that, Phil. I really don't. I think she can strike, but she is married to the idea of control. She is controlling, she's mitigating the opponent, she's limiting their options. What happens if the tools that are supposed to limit the opponent's options don't? The opponent might have access to worse options, but she will still take options. That is the thing that, if I liked Valentina Shevchenko at all, would concern me for her.
Mm-hmm. But as it is, it's your last shining hope.
Yes, it is. As I said, I want to be very clear. It's over for me. If Andrade doesn't win, sayonara. Phil, you can have my computer, I guess.
Wow. Do I need to do the traditional like friend thing of cleaning the hard drive off without looking at it?
Yes. Do not look at
And
it.
all the browser history.
Tom Elliott gets all my guitars. Sorry.
Hey.
Sorry. What? You're a computer guy. You like this stuff. You can have some of the books.
He's a computer guy too.
Is he? I guess I'll just burn
he
it
is.
all. That probably seems the most fair.
Fair enough. Just like some kind of dramatic Viking funeral pyre. And a
it's all
suicide
just-
note about how boring Valentina Shevchenko is. But yeah, I mean, this is a genuinely
It's all just melting
like
plastic.
really interesting fight, I think. Which
Phil, I'm still getting
Are we breaking
myself
up?
together over here. Christ. The Viking funeral with all the melting plastic. Very funny. Okay, all right. Sorry, you were trying to move on to professional topics.
yeah, I mean, it's a genuinely very interesting fight, but I think it's going to be quite apparent. I think Andrade is going to look really small.
She always
Against-
does, doesn't she?
Yeah, but I mean, she generally looks like much bigger in at least one dimension. I think she's just going to look kind of small in this one.
Probably. Shevchenko is thick around the back and shoulders in a way that few Andrade opponents are.
And yeah, I would like to see, as mentioned, wait a minute, I'm now losing track of what we've talked about on this and what we've talked about beforehand.
I know. We shouldn't have done such an interesting
If you
discussion.
force her into the cage,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that Valentina Shevchenko trains in a cage. Like, because her cage wrestling is just not been very good in the times when people have broken her distance management and gotten her there. Like famously, Juliana Pena like ran her into the fence and took her down, and then got submitted because it's Juliana Pena and she got really excited.
Yeah. That happens.
But I remember people talking about how how incredible Shevchenko is. She can submit a grappler like Juliana Pena, and she's also a great offensive wrestler herself, and she's a fantastic kickboxer and so on. I just remember thinking, that's really worrying.
Yes.
Juliana Pena is not a coherent fighter. And it did always stick with me a bit that just someone with raw blind aggression and kind of looping back to your original point.
Yeah.
Just shoved her right into the cage at the
I mean,
start
right,
of the fight.
you
and
would
then took her down.
think for the best counterpuncher in women's MMA, Juliana Pena would be the ideal opponent for like a star-making action performance. But instead, Shevchenko got taken down in both of the 2 rounds and got a submission off of her back. Not saying that couldn't happen. She went for a triangle against Jennifer Maia. She'll still go for it. But yeah, I think that's the really interesting counterpoint to the main question, which seems to be, how does Shevchenko control a relentless Andrade? Can she take her down? That's a big question. In response to that, I would say maybe Andrade can do, again, something that Maia did a bit of, using the momentum of that moment, something she has proven to be really good at in her recent fights. Recall, of course, she didn't get taken down, or she got taken down once in like a weird exchange by Rose Namajunas in the rematch and instantly swept her and got back up. I don't think she got taken down at all by Claudia Gadelha.
No, I think Gadelha might have pulled guard or something. Something strange happened at the end of the first round anyway.
So she's gotten increasingly good at not accepting bottom position, not accepting the takedown. And I think there's a real opening for that against Shevchenko in particular. I think this is why it worked for Maia when she did it. Shevchenko is like a body lock takedown artist, and she is really, really, she muscles people. I mean, there is technique there, but she really muscles people around when she gets to that body lock. And why shouldn't she? She clasps on super hard and just bodily drives her opponent to the ground. And she's got such a tight grip and such a hard push in one direction or the other, you can basically be assured of where her body is going as the takedown is completed. So if you're ready for it, and you get an elevator in, you get a knee shield in, you even just roll over at the right time, you can sweep her and reverse the takedown. Andrade is good at this. So I'm dubious of whether or not Shevchenko can get to these positions where she can actually bank time on top of Andrade. But the other side of that question is, as you just pointed out, can Shevchenko stop Andrade's wrestling? Because Andrade herself will just brute lift people off the ground and throw them through the air. And while her clinch may not be great, I think it's a very interesting question of, does Shevchenko train with a cage? Because she like there are a couple typical answers we see to cage clinching in MMA that have proven to be effective over many fights. One of them is like you get an overhook, you control the wrist of the other arm, and then you sneak out on the wrist control side, right? The overhook is a control that you can quickly relinquish as long as you're moving away from the underhook on that side. It only stops movement in one direction. And Shevchenko did that against Maia in the 5th round, and at no point before. Not a good look. We may talk shit about Jessica Andrade being weak in the clinch. How good is Jennifer Maia as a clinch fighter? She really just got an underhook and held her there. There wasn't a whole lot of craft, to be honest. Shevchenko just seemed uncomfortable with it. So,
yeah, I think there's definitely things to look for.
The body punching, the relentlessness, the incredible durability.
I think there are definitely things to look for, but I cannot bring myself to pick against the evil Shevchenko.
You're a son of a bitch.
The other thing that it reminds that I have to think of is Andrade's bantamweight run, because it did illustrate how much when she dropped down to strawweight, suddenly the idea of her being an unstoppable force of nature, that was when it was born. Because she did. And she had great fights normally at bantamweight. She did also get bullied and beaten up a lot. She wasn't always outpowering.
No.
She wasn't always able to overpower everyone. She lost a physical, grueling fight, which is it's actually a really fun fight. I would recommend anyone who wants to watch just a big bruising brawl against Raquel Pennington.
Right.
And Raquel Pennington is just reasonably big and tough. Whereas, Shevchenko, as mentioned, had a very strong argument for being bantamweight champion, and probably could have defended it. Maybe not as much as Nunes did. She might have had real issues with Jermaine Durandamy, for example. But still, she was a championship quality fighter, and Raquel Pennington was not. And Andrade has improved greatly since then. I've really, really liked the improvements we've seen from her lately. But I just think, it's like Usman Masvidal. I think we're just in for some counters and some top control, and the same story being repeated, just with Andrade instead of Maia. And I don't want to think that, but that's what I think.
Yeah, good thing you're wrong. I mean, thank goodness. Jessica Andrade by decision. That's my pick. She never gets tired.
50-45?
Oh, no.
Crushing the puny Shevchenko with
No. Shevchenko is going to have to pull out the stops and try to knock her the fuck out. If it is the kind of pressure Andrade needs, even if so it could be a slow start of sorts, and then Andrade works her way in. It could be a fast start, and Shevchenko just has to fire on all cylinders. Either way, she's going to hit it. Andrade is still very hittable, especially if you were as good at timing and distance as Shevchenko is. Getting to the point where the fight even becomes messy enough for Andrade to have a good shot is going to be difficult and uncomfortable. But I think she can wear her down. So I'm picking Andrade. I'm doing it. I'm pulling the trigger at last.
Godspeed, Jessica.
And if it doesn't work, I will pull the trigger at last. Reiterate that for everyone. Godspeed, Jessica. Bache Estaka. Godspeed to you. All right. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm very excited for these 3 title fights. You know, I'm even more excited for Masvidal Usman 2 than I thought I was. I'm at least I'm curious.
To be honest, I came into this one and I was just thinking, I'm looking forward to breaking down Weili Zhang and Rose Namajunas. And there's 2 other fights as well. But like these have genuinely enjoyed talking about all 3 of them.
Very much. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening, you beautiful listeners out there. Make sure you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. There is possibly going to be a Whitaker discussion. Phil and I haven't decided if we're going to do that yet, but there will be a Heavy Hands Q&A, much delayed after we recorded it, but it's going up. And last week, in case you missed it, I cut out the little 20 minutes of us just gushing over John McDessie and talking briefly about Mateusz Gamrot, and threw that on the Patreon as well. So for $3 a month, you can get access to all those episodes, and we really appreciate your guys' support. Just before we go, Phil, anything to plug?
I will be breaking down all 3 of the title fights once again with
Nice.
David Castillo. So if you want to hear my sort of thoughts as I've percolated on them some more, and obviously David as well, then make sure to check out Toe-to-Toe Preview on Bloody Elbow. I also will mention that I find it horrific that you seem to save some of your best insights for Zayn because you love him more than me. Because you were calling out how Robert Whitaker was going to badly hurt Kelvin Gastelum with a head kick on the vivisection. You didn't do that when we were talking.
Well, maybe let that be a lesson to you, Phil. Maybe you should be a little nicer to me. Maybe you should give a little more credence to my insane anti-Shevchenko picks. Maybe you should baby me just a little bit more, like Zayn definitely does.
Oh, yeah. Well-known Connor... person who treats Connor well, Zayn Simon.
My restless protector, Zayn Simon, always looking out for my best interests, never making fun of me and making me feel small. Yep. Well, for me, I think I will be writing something, but I don't know what it is yet. But generally for these big events, it might just be an op-ed, but I'm not sure. So I guess just keep your eyes peeled to Bloody Elbow. Certainly check out all 3 of Phil's toe-to-toe previews. Those are always worth reading with Dave Castillo. And, hey, 3 fights to do this week. I mean, that's an unusual treat as well. So you're going to get more toe-to-toe preview than you typically do. Otherwise, thanks all for listening. Find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson on Twitter. Find me at Boxing Bush. Once again, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon for the Heavy Bag Q&A and for other stuff as well. And we will catch you next week. I'm really looking forward to talking about these fights post-talk. I want to see them, and I can't wait to break them down. So please join us for that next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Well, phenomenal. Give me 1 sec. I just got to feed the kitty.
Yep, no problem.
I don't know what you're complaining about. You're not going outside, that's for fucking sure. No.